Hey, welcome back. This is not going to be a typical video for me, so normally I try to teach or explain a concept or actually build and code something with you. We're not going to be doing that in this video. This video is just about giving you a practice challenge that you can really sink your teeth into and sort of work on your own at the end of the video. So what's the challenge, or what are we going to be doing? Well, I'm going to give you a back-end API that will run locally on your computer, and then it's really your job. It's very open-ended. It's your job to build a usable front-end experience that's powered by that API. So first, we'll get the API up and running locally by using Docker. Now don't worry, even if you've never used Docker before or you have no idea what it is, that's okay. I'm just going to give you a single configuration file that will get Docker up and running. It'll basically give you a Node.js and MongoDB backend API without any effort. After that, we'll walk through sending a few practice requests together. So you could use something like Postman, but I'm going to use an application called Insomnia. But we'll walk through a few requests where we create or register a user account, and then we create one new blog post. After that, I'll show you how to actually connect to the database if you want to visualize or inspect the data directly yourself. And that's really it. So once we walk through those few basic steps together, it's up to you to look through the documentation I've created. So on GitHub, you'll see API endpoints. So these are all of the different actions that are available through different URL endpoints. You can register an account, you can log in, you can create a blog post, delete one, you can start following another user, you can get a homepage feed with, the latest posts from the users you follow. You could search for posts based on a certain keyword. And that's really it. It's just up to you to leverage these different endpoints to build something compelling, a front-end experience. The idea here, and you might have ran into this as well, but I remember when I was first trying to learn React, or really any front-end framework, or just front-end development in general, the problem was that you didn't really have a real project to sink your teeth into. So none of your examples or projects that you were building felt real or meaningful or usable. They all just seemed like, pointless. So the idea here is you're building a real front end, that connects to a database that's actually doing something. Now this is super open-ended. So both from a design perspective, so you could use CSS or Bootstrap, and just from a framework perspective. So you could use vanilla JavaScript, you could use React, you could use Vue, you could go in a totally different direction and just use sort of a proxy traditional server powered by PHP or Python or something. It's totally up to you. I'm not giving you all of the answers in this video. I'm just giving you a practice exercise. Before we jump into the action, I want to say that this video is sponsored by my React.js course. So in my React course, we work with this exact same backend API, and we learn how to build a single page application. So using client-side routing, we build an entire front end from start to finish that's powered by this backend API. So if you like to be spoon-fed a lot of the answers and solutions, you might be interested in that React.js course, but that doesn't change the fact that the backend API is a good open-ended project for anyone to sink their teeth into. Without further ado, let's jump into the action. Okay, so it all begins with this GitHub repo that I've set up. So you'll want to visit this page. It's github.com/learnwebcode/practice-API, or you'll find a link to this in the description of this YouTube video. So the README for this repo contains sort of a text version of what's going to happen in this video, but it's really just sort of a big picture bird's eye view, whereas this video is meant to make it a lot easier to follow along with this. So the first step is that you'll need to have Docker installed on your computer. Now, the good news is you don't need to know anything about Docker in order to benefit from it. Now, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely worth your time and effort to learn a little bit about Docker, but my point is that that's sort of outside the scope of this video, and it's almost sort of besides the point, because again, even if we don't know what Docker is or how to use it at all, that doesn't change the fact that Docker makes it unbelievably simple to get a local development app up and running on our computer. In this particular example of getting a backend API up and running, Docker is going to make it so we don't need to install MongoDB on our computer. We don't need to configure a Node application to have password credentials to a database. We really won't need to configure literally anything thanks to Docker. So it's completely free to use Docker. It's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. I've provided a link here, but you can also visit docker.com, and then they have a Docker desktop download page. So just go ahead and download and install Docker, and then come back and resume this video once you've done that. Okay, moving forward, I'll assume if you're watching this, you have Docker at this point. So now, all we need to do is create a new empty folder anywhere on your computer. So I have this new example folder, and you just want to place this docker-compose.yml file from this same GitHub repo we've been looking at. You just want to place this file in your new empty folder. So you can either clone this repo, or you can just click the green code button and click download zip, or you can just click directly on the Docker Compose file, click this raw button, and then just, Control S or Command S and save this file. So it's up to you, but once you have this file, so for example, here it is on my desktop, just drag it into your new empty folder. Okay, and now we're literally just one step away from having the API up and running. All we need to do now is have a command line point towards your new folder. So you can use your actual command line, or you could just open up this folder in VS Code and then press Control J on Windows or Command J on Mac, but that would get you a command line pointing towards that folder. Okay, and once your command line is pointing towards your new folder, all you need to do is say docker compose up and then a space dash lowercase d. That's it. So go ahead and press enter. Now, the very first time you run this, it will take a moment, even on a fast internet connection, because it needs to download the images for MongoDB, Node.js, maybe a very lightweight Linux distribution image. But it shouldn't take too long. All in all, I don't think it's much more than 1 gigabyte in total. Okay, through the magic of video editing, I just skipped ahead to the point where my download's all completed. And at this point, our API is now up and running. So in your browser, you can visit in a new tab, just localhost:8080. And you should see this hello message. Hello, if you see this message, that means your backend is up and running successfully. Cool. I'll explain where we go from here in just a moment, but I do want to let you know a little bit about Docker commands. So that compose command that we ran, so this docker compose up-d, you don't ever need to run that again in this folder or project. So that's just what you run the first time that you're first creating it. From now forward, if you ever want to stop the application, it's docker compose stop. So if I run that, and then if I tried to refresh and visit it in the browser, obviously the request fails. And then let's say it's tomorrow or next week or next month and you want to start the application up again. Well, as long as your command line's pointing towards this folder, you can just say docker compose start. And now it's available again. At this point, let's learn how to do something actually interesting with the API, because sending a GET request to the homepage or base URL, this is not very interesting. However, if we wanted to sign up for a new account, you can send a POST request to /register. Now, if you try to visit this in your browser, that would be a GET request. So we need an easy way to send a POST request, and you might have heard of the popular program called Postman. So if we jump back to my GitHub repo, I have this section called Easiest Way to Send Practice Requests. So you're free to use Postman if you want to. It's very popular. But as of late, I prefer using something called Insomnia. It's very similar to Postman. I just find it a bit easier to use. Basically, this app makes it super simple to send off post requests, delete requests, any type of requests with any type of data payload. It's available for free on Windows, Mac, and Linux, so I provided a link to this website on the GitHub page. If you want to give it a try, that's cool, or if you want to use Postman, that's great either way, but I'll show you what I would do in Insomnia. So you can right-click in this left-hand area, and I'll just click New Request. The name here doesn't matter, this is just for your own organization purposes, but I'll name it maybe Register New Account. Okay, and then this is very important. On this right-hand side, this defines what type of request it is. So we don't just want a GET request where you're essentially visiting a page. We want to set it to a POST request. We're going to send along a bit of data. So POST request. And now instead of no body, we want to send along a bit of JSON data. So click JSON. Let's click create. Okay, now in this area, you type in the URL, and then in this area, we just type in the JSON that we want to send along. So if we're trying to register for a new account, remember, and it was this base URL and then /register. So the URL would be http://localhost:8080/register. And then for the data that we want to send along to that URL, it would just be curly brackets, right? A JSON object. And now I can just tell you that you need to send over a username, a password, and an email address. But I won't always be here in a video telling you exactly what you need to send along. So down at the bottom of this GitHub page that we've been looking at, I have this section called API Endpoints. So for every different URL that's available, you can click on it. So for example, register a new account. And I've documented that it's a post request. And I've also documented what you're supposed to send over. So you could save a little bit of typing by just copying this and then sending that as your data. But you're free to change the name. So instead of username Brad, you could set it to username Barks a lot. Email example@example.com, and then the password is QWERTY. So we're just signing up for a new account. Go ahead and click the send button. Okay, here's the server's response. So we actually receive an error message. So it's an array. There's just one reason why the registration failed, and it says you must provide a valid email address. So example@example, let's change that to example.com or just some sort of domain. If we click send once again, cool, it was successful. Let's review what's going on here. So in the real world, when a person visits your website or web app or iOS or Android app, they don't manually create a request like this. That's sort of the entire point of front-end design and development. We don't expect normal people to code requests. Instead, they just fill out an intuitive and nicely designed form that asks them to choose a username and password, and then their browser or their iOS or Android app turns that into a request like this. And then when the server responds with information like this, again, a regular user never actually sees this data. Their browser just saves it as a cookie or in local storage, or the iOS or Android app just saves it using their mechanisms. But the point here is that this token value is being saved or stored on the client side. Now, some apps don't use tokens. They instead would use sessions and session IDs. But with APIs in particular, tokens are very popular. Anyways, this value is saved on the client side because then for any future requests, providing this value proves that you are the user you're claiming to be. So this gives us access or permission to perform actions as this user. So for example, I just registered a new user account called Barks a Lot. So now let me try to create a new blog post as Barks a Lot. So you would just copy this entire token value, highlight and copy that into your clipboard, and let's create a brand new request. So over on this left-hand side of Insomnia, I'll right-click, new request. Again, this name doesn't really matter, but I'll just name it create new blog post and set it to be a post request. Set the body to be JSON. Click create. For the address, http://localhost:8080/ and now I could tell you exactly where to go, but I actually want you to get in the habit of looking at this GitHub page we've been looking at. Scroll down to the API endpoints area, and you can just look through the available actions. So you can see it's about the 4th or 5th down, create new post. So if we click on that, you're supposed to send a post request to /create-post. So let's set that, create-post. And then in terms of what you're actually supposed to send as your data, well, the documentation says you should have a title property, a body property, and your token. You could copy and paste this, but because I already have my token in my clipboard, I'll just type it out by hand. So curly brackets for an object. Let's have a property called title and say, being a dog is wonderful, comma. Let's have another property called body, right? Just sort of the body content. I'll just say lorem ipsum, today I am a dog. Finally, quotes. Let's have one more property named token. and it needs to have that exact value from a previous request. So I'm just going to paste in my clipboard. The idea is that this token is cryptographically secure. It proves that I am the Barks-a-Lot user, and if it was even one single character off, the request will fail. Whoops, before I actually send this request, I do need to wrap the word token in quotes, like this. Okay, but now let's go ahead and send this request. Okay, the server's response code is 200, which means successful or okay, and it returned with the ID of that newly created post. Now, before we talk about what you could do with this ID value, and before we go look at any of the other API endpoints in the documentation, I first want to talk a little bit about the database aspect of the API. For example, what if you want to actually see that new user and new blog post that we just created, actually see it in the database? Well, remember earlier in the video when we used Docker in our new folder? So in that new folder, we placed the Docker compose file. In that same folder, Docker created this DB folder for us, and this folder stores the actual data for our database. So wouldn't it be nice if we could directly connect to the database ourselves and inspect the data? For example, maybe you created a user account that you want to delete. Or maybe it's just useful for your own learning and understanding to actually visualize and see the data. So how would we do that? Well, our backend API is using MongoDB to store the data. And while we do not need to install a MongoDB server on our computer, Docker is already taking care of that, we do want to install a MongoDB GUI client that makes it easy to connect to a MongoDB server. So to do that, I recommend this app. I've included a link to this on the GitHub page we've been working on, but essentially this is the official MongoDB Compass application. It's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So feel free to pause this video lesson while you go ahead and download and install MongoDB Compass. Then once you've installed it and opened the application, come back and resume the video. Okay, so once you open MongoDB Compass, it'll look something like this. And really the question just becomes, what sort of value do we enter as a connection string to connect to our Docker backend API? So what value do we place here? Well, on my GitHub documentation page, there's a section called Viewing the Database Directly. Here's a link to Compass, but then down here, this is the value that you would use as your connection string. So just select that, copy it to your clipboard, back in Compass, just paste that value in, and then click Connect. Cool, and then the database in particular that we're interested in is called Our App. So click onto that. You can also use the sidebar here. Inside the Our App database, you can see there's two collections, posts and users. If I go into users, as you might have guessed, there's the Barks-a-Lot account that I created. And if we jump into the posts collection, there's just one post, but there it is, being a dog is wonderful. And that actually concludes the walkthrough that I wanted to review with you in terms of getting this practice API set up. From here, it's just a matter of reading the documentation back on the GitHub page, reading the documentation for all of the different endpoint URLs that are available. So we already registered an account. These two, does username exist and does email exist, you would use these on the fly. So as the user is filling out the registration form, maybe you wait 300 milliseconds after they've stopped typing a username value, and then you could use this endpoint to see if that name already exists or not in the database. You can use login to generate a new token if you need to. We already used create new post, view single post. Well, that's where you would use the ID for the post that you created. So if you click on that, the URL is /post/ and then the unique ID for a given post. Edit or update an existing post. You can delete a post. This is where it gets a bit interesting. You can start following a user or stop following a user. So one user can follow a different user, and then this is where it gets fun. You can have a homepage feed. So if you think of like Twitter or Facebook or any social media, your homepage feed shows you the latest posts from the users you follow. Then we have several profile endpoints. So the general one shows you the counts, so how many posts a user has created, how many followers they have, how many users they're following, and then another few profile links. So this one shows you all of the posts by a particular user, This one actually lists all of the followers for a user. This one shows all of the users they are following. And then finally, you can let users search for specific content in the title or body fields of blog posts. And that's it. Now, you can perform all of these actions through Insomnia, right? Just like we did for registering an account and creating a new blog post. But we as developers, we are not valuable because we can send practice requests through Postman or Insomnia. We're valuable because we can create websites or web apps or iOS or Android apps that basically perform these actions behind the scenes, right? It's our job to create an intuitive front-end user experience and sort of translate that into requests, right? And make requests on behalf of users that have no idea how the code is working. So the real challenge of this video, or I should say, your real homework here, is to choose what type of front end you want to build. So you could create a single page application using client-side routing. You could do this using vanilla JavaScript or React or Vue.js. Or you could go in a totally different direction and create, traditional full page reloads using an old school application. To do that, you could use something like Node or PHP or Python, and you would use that as sort of a proxy server that processes the user's requests. So you would send them traditional HTML pages and forms, and then you would process their form submits and then relay the server's response back to the user. Or you could create a mobile app on iOS or Android. Really, the possibilities are endless. But the idea is that I think it's nice to have a project to really sink your teeth into. I think one of the hardest things when you're learning development is not having a common thread to anchor all of your questions to. When you're starting out, you run across so many questions, but if you're constantly jumping from one small tutorial to the next small tutorial, it feels like you're just drowning in a sea of new questions without making any meaningful progress towards anything. So with this challenge, you have one consistent project to stick with and gradually work through all of your questions through Googling or Stack Overflowing. And in the end, you will have built something real or something tangible, something usable. And once you actually have something built that's usable, right? So you designed the front end using CSS or Bootstrap or whatever technology stack you're using, but you will have built it sort of from the ground up. Now, yes, you didn't write any direct database queries and you didn't handle hashing the user's passwords before it goes into the database and really all of the application logic. Yes, you didn't build that, but that's almost a different skill set entirely. Trust me, being able to interact with an API like this and building a usable front end for it, that is a very, very marketable skill. So this might not be an easy project. You might have a lot of things to research, but at least now you have a common thread or sort of this one challenge that when you do finish, you're going to feel very accomplished. Anyways, that's going to bring this video to a close. I hope this challenge or this practice API helps someone out there. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more tutorials and take care.